name is Jacqueline Pollauf, and I'm so pleased you're joining me today for this, the third live stream recital in my spring series. Today's performance is entitled At the Paris Conservatoire. And the performance will last about 30 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, as I have a lot of music today. At the end of it, I will stay around for questions. The program is listed in the description below, but I will announce it and share some thoughts as we go along. And the chat is open if you'd like to say anything there. So the Paris Conservatoire was the center of the harp world for many, many years. And many notable harpists studied there. Some of the performers that we really look to as giants in the past, including Carlos Salcedo, Marcel Grangeny, Marcel Tournier, André Jolivet, the list goes on and on. But also, another thing that came out of the Paris Conservatoire, in addition to these great harpists, is a lot of beautiful music. Many composers that were associated with the conservatory in one way or another wrote some beautiful music for the harp, and so I wanted to play 4 pieces associated with the Paris Conservatoire today. So I'm going to start by a very well-known piece in the harp world, the Impromptu-Caprice by Gabriel Pierné. And Pierné was a composer, a conductor, pianist, and organist. He lived from 1863 to 1937, and he attended the conservatory as a student. And he composed this piece quite early on in his career, and it was actually used in the harp department as an examination piece at the conservatory, where all the harpists had to learn it and perform it and be graded upon their performance. So it was published around 1901. I think it's a very idiomatic piece for the harp overall. And with its kind of late romantic style, it's also very much what people expect when they think of the harp and what harp music sounds like. So you'll hear that it starts with a kind of extended introduction, and then you'll hear the main theme section. Then there's a contrasting sort of dance-like section in the middle, and then we come back to the theme at the end. And one thing I find particularly interesting about the piece is that it really plays with the idea of major and minor, both sometimes coming right back to a chord as major and then immediately as minor, and then also overall within the key structure of the piece. So the main theme is in major, the contrasting dance-like theme in the middle is in minor, so there's a lot of this shifting back and forth between the two. So here is Gabriel Pierné's Impromptu-Caprice. All right. So after that, we're going to move in a very different direction. Next, I wanted to look at a piece by the composer André Jolivet. And Jolivet lived from 1905 to 1974. He was a composer who really explored a lot of different things in his music. Throughout his composing career, at times he looked at atonality and experimental music. He also wrote music for the theater, and he was particularly interested in what he called magical or ritualistic music, where he was really trying to connect some things outside of just the idiom of music. And he taught at the Paris Conservatoire starting in 1961, and this piece that I'm going to play, his Prélude for harp, was published in 1966, so after he started teaching there. In addition to this solo piece, he composed quite a bit for the harp. He also wrote a harp concerto, and he included harp prominently in several chamber pieces as well. So this prelude is a short piece. I think it's very introspective, and it has a lot of kind of strength and yes, things swimming underneath the surface throughout it. It's really difficult because of the pedals in the piece. Actually, when I was practicing for this program, I was thinking that you could subtitle the whole program Pedals on the Harp, because so many of the pieces today have quite difficult pedals. And I'm sure many of you watching already know how the pedals of the harp work, but if you don't, all of the strings are connected to a row of discs so that each string can be in 3 different positions, long, medium, or short. In musical terms, that would be flat, natural, and sharp. And then those discs connect down through the column of the harp to 7 pedals around the base. So every time that there is an accidental or a modulation, you actually have to prepare it with your feet in advance. So a piece like the one that I'm about to play that is shifting all over the place just has tons and tons of pedals throughout it. And what makes this particular piece quite challenging is not so much moving the pedals at the pace they need to be moved, but to do so subtly so that the audience, is focused on the beautiful sound coming from the harp and not everything that's happening with your feet. It's an interesting piece. I'd say it's kind of somewhere between the impressionistic style and modern music. As I mentioned, the whole thing just keeps kind of shifting around. You'll hear a melody, but then it just keeps twisting and twisting throughout the piece as it goes to all sorts of different chords and places. So here is André Jolivet's Prélude for the harp. From here, I wanted to move to the music of André Caplet. André Caplet lived from 1867 to 1925, and he attended the Paris Conservatoire and actually won their most prestigious composition prize, the Prix de Rome, in 1901. He's best known actually as a close friend of Claude Debussy's, and he orchestrated a lot of Debussy's famous works, things that Debussy had written, I believe primarily for solo piano, that Caplet then turned into orchestra arrangements. He had kind of a difficult life in some ways. He fought in World War I and was gassed in the trenches, which led to his death several years later from residual problems with his lungs. And this piece that I'm going to play today, the Divertissement à l'Espagnol, he wrote in 1924, so just a year before his death, and I'm so glad he managed to squeeze it in. Like Jolivet, he wrote quite a bit for the harp, various chamber pieces, and then this Divertissement, actually there's a set of two. I'm just going to be playing one piece today, but he wrote them as a set of two solo pieces. So this piece he wrote in a Spanish style, and it's really interesting. It has two distinct sections, kind of a bit warring throughout it. So there are these very abrupt sections contrasting with these very flowing sections, and it keeps going back and forth between the two. And in the abrupt sections, you'll hear the harp used in a very percussive and kind of aggressive way. Not at all what most people are expecting. So there are a lot of pedal slides and then chords that you play and stop the sound immediately. A lot of bursts of sounds. It's very rhythmic. And then for the contrasting flowing sections, he wrote these without time signatures, so they can just sort of drift along. There's a lot of arpeggios and glissandos, a lot of trills, much more sort of gentle, I would say, writing for the harp in contrast with all that aggressiveness. And in these flowing sections, he's really exploring a lot of different colors on the harp. So this piece is also known for its pedals, but in a very different way from the last piece. I mentioned that in the aggressive section, he uses the technique of a pedal slide. This is considered an extended technique on the harp. And what you do is you play a string and then you move the pedal directly after so that you hear the resonance change. So it's the opposite of the way that you normally move the pedals, where for most pieces you're trying to make them very discreet, but here you're really kind of leaning in for the sound. So you hear this sound a lot throughout the piece. And it's kind of a bold sound. You hear a little bit of the bite of the string in there. So here is André Caplet's Divertissement à l'Espagnol. So for the final piece today, I wanted to play something quite different. I'm really excited about this actually. This is my own transcription of a piece by Lili Boulanger. And Lili Boulanger is not a terribly well-known composer, largely because she lived such a short life. She only lived from 1893 to 1918. She had a lot of health issues, and so she ended up dying from tuberculosis, sadly at the age of 24. She's best known probably in relation to her sister, Nadia Boulanger. Nadia Boulanger was a prominent composition teacher throughout the 20th century, and both sisters studied at the Paris Conservatoire. And Lili actually had the distinction there of being the first woman to win the Prix de Rome competition. Their father also was a musician, and he had won it many years before, so quite exciting. So in addition to composing, which was her primary musical occupation, Lili also played several instruments, and she did play the harp a bit, but she did not write any works for solo harp. She included the harp in some of her chamber works, but no solo works. So this is a piece that she wrote for piano that I took it upon myself to transcribe. I've transcribed quite a bit of music, and this was very challenging. There were a lot of unusual things about it that made it quite a puzzle to work out for the harp. And of course, in keeping with our theme, the pedals are a big part of that. Lili's music in general really reminds me of Claude Debussy's in some ways. I hear a lot of similarities there, but she keeps going to very unusual places. So in this set of 3 pieces that I'm about to play, you'll hear that she sets something up, and at the beginning it's quite stable, and then it will kind of take an unexpected turn and frequently go somewhere that is a little bit unusual. So as I said, it's a set of 3 pieces. The first one, the title translates to In an Old Garden, and this is sort of a slow, dreamy piece. I think of maybe an overgrown garden, so not terribly well kept. And that's very much in contrast with the second piece of the 3, which is In a Clear Garden. And this one to me sounds like there's a lot of sunshine and everything is very tidy and well organized in this garden. And then the final piece is the cortège, meaning procession, and this one is quite a joyful piece. I think it's really rather on the bubbly side. So here is Lili Boulanger's Trois Morceaux pour piano, transcribed by myself for the harp. My first performance of this, so very exciting. And I hope you enjoy this final piece on the program today. Well, thank you all so much for coming and joining me today. I'm going to come around here and see if anyone has any questions. I did just want to mention how much I appreciate everyone attending. And there is information in the description to make a contribution if you so choose, either through PayPal or Venmo. And of course, any amount is appreciated. So I do have a few things coming up that I also wanted to mention before we get to the questions. Next month will be my last live stream of the spring series on May 21st, I believe, the third Friday of May. I'll be giving my final performance for the live streams of the spring. This will be a performance entitled A Harp Sketchbook, and playing works by Grace Becker-Vamos, Betty Jackson King, and Marcel Samuel Rousseau. So we're looking forward to that. I'm also doing an online workshop in May on chords and arpeggios on the harp for students. And then finally, if you're in the Mid-Atlantic area, I have several live performances coming up, in-person performances. More information about that is on my website calendar if you'd be interested in coming in person. So those are all my announcements. I'm going to go ahead and look and see what people have to say here in the chat. Oh, so many lovely comments. Wow. Hello and welcome from Indonesia. That's very exciting. All right. I really like Lori's description of the last piece about gardening. I think that's excellent. Oh, and then we have a question about playing with a straight soundboard. Oh, that's an interesting question. So the harp that I'm playing here, maybe if I shift, you'll be able to see it a little bit better. The soundboard is the part coming down, oops, and this is a Line and Helios style 30. So the soundboard on this is made to kind of go out at the bottom and get a bit bigger. And having that, which is called an extended soundboard, gives you a richer, fuller sound on the harp. But some harps are built with a straight soundboard where they come down and they're a bit more narrow, and then you have a little bit of less sound. I would say, in answer to your question, that certainly you could play the pieces on a harp with a straight soundboard. You might not have quite as much resonance as some of the composers perhaps intended, but since the harp has evolved to its current state over many years, when some of these composers were writing, the harp did have a smaller soundboard at that time. So I think I would go ahead and give it a try and see what you think about the sound. Oh, and then Kara has a nice comment about the transcription. Thank you. I'm so glad you liked the transcription. That's excellent. Paige really enjoyed the Caplet. Yes, that is a very exciting piece. Oh, and someone from Chile. Thank you so much for coming from Chile. That's excellent. Oh, and then Kara has a question about the transcription. Yes, Kara, I would say it is definitely advanced level. There's a lot of tricky things going on in there. And although some of it sits on the harp really nicely, some of it does not. There are some very awkward voicings for some of the chords and arpeggios and things. And there are also so many pedals throughout the piece. I actually had a question about that earlier in the week, transcribing the piece and kind of what process I used. So with this particular piece, one of my main concerns was being able to achieve all of that chromaticism on the harp. So I kind of tackled that first, and I had a copy of the score, and I spent a lot of time working out different enharmonic solutions where I was playing things on a different string than you might normally. And that's a pretty complex process in some pieces, this one especially, because as soon as I worked something out that would work very well to solve one problem, then I would be poorly set up for the next measure. So it felt kind of like solving a Rubik's Cube, where as soon as I figured something out, I had just created a new problem. So it took me far longer than usual to work out all of the pedals and the enharmonic solutions for this. And then after that, I made some adjustments to a few things for what octave they're played in and what register. Boulanger, I think, was really using the whole range of the piano. So actually that transcription does use the whole range of the harp, which is just a tiny bit smaller than the piano. So every single string is used within that. And there were a few things that I adjusted to try and suit the resonance a little bit more. So it did take some time, and then it also took some time, of course, to learn it as well. But a very satisfying process overall. Yes, other questions, if you want to, you can go ahead and put them in the chat. Sometimes there's a little delay, so I don't see them right away. I had another question earlier this week about working with so many pedals. A lot of harpists find the pedals of the harp can be a bit challenging, and if you have a piece, say for example like the Jolivet Prélude or the Caplet Divertissement, where there's just so many pedals to keep track of, I had a student asking me about how I approach that in my practicing. So generally the approach that I use is, first I make sure that my pedals are very clearly marked in my music and that they're shown rhythmically right where I want to move them. So sometimes if the music comes with the pedals already written in, I scratch them all out and rewrite them the way that I prefer. And then when I'm practicing, I really try to think about why I'm moving a pedal. So if a chord has an accidental that necessitates a pedal change, I will link the two in my mind, and I find that's very helpful so that I'm not moving the pedals completely separately from what I'm playing, but instead they're intertwined. I also find that helpful for deciding precisely when to move the pedals to try to keep them, as quiet as possible. And after I've set up those two things, marking it all smoothly in the music, and then practicing with all of that in mind, then I just try to be very consistent in moving the pedals so that it becomes quite automatic feeling and not something that I have to focus the primary part of my attention on, but it can just be a supporting part of playing. All right, really good. So just checking to see if we have any other questions coming in. It's lovely to see so many people and people coming from so many different places. Thank you for watching, especially if you have a strange time zone where you are. Yes. All right. Well, I think we will go ahead and wrap up there. So thank you again for coming. Hope to see you either at some of the upcoming live performances or next month for the May live stream. Thank you so much, everyone.